Right, so you've got this skull mould. So obviously you've got the mother mould here, which is made of plaster of Paris. We've got the latex mould. I made that, and that was moulded from a resin skull which I got from eBay. You can either buy a skull mould, latex mould, or make your own mould taken from your own designs, or maybe another design, but you want to be careful with copyright and things like that. So it is best to make and sculpt your own material if you can. Certainly if you're selling these items. Anyway, so here we go. So this is going to be a concrete skull. Mixed up the concrete, which is 2 parts sand, 1 part cement, some washing up liquid, concrete bonder, and some polyfibers, which gives you that strength for the concrete. So there we go. I'll just fill in this up. I'll fill it in stages and tap the air bubbles out as I go through. So I'm just doing this video as part of the skull series of videos. There's a few videos with skull related themes, paint jobs and casting. I want to sculpt my own skull at some point, so I will do that once I get around to it. It's on the list of projects. Anyway, I'll continue filling this mould. Right, so there we are, there's a skull mould filled. So same as always, I tapped it to get the air bubbles out, and I'm going to seal it up with some cling film, so that helps the curing process and keep the moisture inside the concrete. So there we are, that's ready. We'll wait the night and we'll demould it tomorrow. Right, so we've waited nearly 24 hours for the concrete to cure, and now we're going to demould the cast from the mould. There's a bit of water there. So we'll just drain that off. And now we'll demould the cast. So there we are, there's our skull and the mould. We'll clean that up, ready for another cast. Just tidy up the edges underneath. It's got a screwdriver there, just scrape those edges off. So there we are, one concrete skull. So there it is. And what I will do is put that skull inside a bag. I'll spray it down with some water, wherever my water bottle is. that can go in this carrier bag, plastic bag, and we'll leave that in the bag, and so the concrete's still curing, and we'll leave that in a bag for a few weeks for it to go nice and hard. And you can create paint effects with your concrete skulls, and there's a few here which I've done. There's a couple of videos on the channel which feature painted skulls or paint effects on skulls and other concrete items. That kind of gives you some ideas. So there we are. I'll just take them out of the bag. I'll put it back in again in a minute, but just for video purposes. Okay, thank you very much. I hope that helped. Right then, so first of all, this is a concrete skull, and the original looks something like this, and it's white cement with polyfibers and sand. So I put a coat of acrylic paint on this skull, which is a mixture of black and brown. So this is dry and ready to dry brush a copper effect onto the top. So I'm going to stir the paint first, and so I'm using this particular copper paint, or copper effect paint. So I'm just going to give it a stir. Right, and now I'm going to put a bit of that on the brush. Get a piece of card. Right, so I'm just going to wipe that onto the piece of card and get it as dry as possible, and then apply it to the skull. Just lightly. I can build the layers up. Oh, there's a hair there. Brings out the detail. And there we have it. We are. We're going to make this skull candle holder, which will hold tea lights. What you need to do is either make your own mould, or perhaps buy a mould from the internet. I made this mould myself. It's a latex mould, and it was taken from this skull which I ordered from the internet, so I didn't make it myself. So that's a resin casted skull, and I filled in the gaps with bits of plasticine and clay. But you can either make your own skull or get a mould. I do want to make my own skull at some point, but I haven't got round to it at the moment. So anyway, what we're going to do is make this skull from plaster of Paris. So I just put the mother mould on to this skull, and So we'll mix up the plaster of Paris to put into this mould. I'm going to use this mould for all sorts of things, mainly concrete skulls, but I'm going to use plaster of Paris to make up our template for another mould, which is going to be the mould for the plaster of Paris model. And of course we're going to make the tea light holder and incorporate it into this cast. So first of all, we'll mix up some plaster of Paris to fill in the mould. So as always, equal volumes of plaster of Paris and water. I'll probably have to mix up a few of these jugs of plaster of Paris, because this is the biggest jugs I've got for mixing. So here goes for the first batch. So add the plaster of Paris to the water. Mix it in as you go. Right, so I'm going to pour into the latex mould now, just carefully or slowly. Right, so that's filled up. We'll just tap the side of the mould to get the air bubbles out. Right, so there we are. We'll wait for maybe an hour or maybe a little bit more, and then we can demould the plaster cast skull from the latex mould, and then we'll go on to the next stage. Right, so this has been left to set for around an hour and a half. So I'm going to demould the skull now. So as you can see, the skull's been demoulded. We can take the latex mould away and wash that for usage at another time. So now we're going to make a candle looking thing and stick that on the top of his head, or her head. So we're going to simulate some kind of candle and put some drippy effects on it, and then we'll drill a hole in the top to sit the tea light. Right, so put the skull on top of an upside down plate. So hopefully that'll make it a little bit easier to work with. I've got this cardboard tube, which is a Pringles tortilla chips carton or whatever. So anything will do. I'm going to use this as a mould. I'm going to stick that on top of the skull and pour some plaster of Paris into the tube, and that's going to act as our shape for the candle. But first I'm going to need to use a knife to fit the tube to the top of the skull, and I'll probably seal the bottom edge with some clay, so that stops the plaster of Paris from seeping through the tube. So first of all, I'll cut this tube to suit. Right, so I've cut a section of the tube away from the carton, and I'm going to try and fit that as best as I can over the skull, which means trying to cut the tube to fit the contours of the top of the head, the top of the skull, while keeping it as vertical as I possibly can as well. Right, so I've done the best I can there to try and reduce the gaps around the tube and to fit that tube to the top of the head. What I'm going to do now is put some clay around the bottom just to seal the gaps. So I'll roll these up into little worms and apply that around the edge. Right, so I've secured the clay in place there to seal up those gaps. I'm going to put a bit of PVA glue just on the plaster of Paris on top of the skull, but not on the inside of the tube. So hopefully that'll give a little bit of adhesion to the new plaster of Paris that we're going to mix up in a moment. Right, so I mix up some more plaster of Paris in the same way as we did earlier. Just enough to fill inside that tube. And we'll wait again for about an hour, and then we'll come back to it. Right, so we've waited around an hour, and then we can take the clay away. And we'll carefully remove the cardboard tube from plaster of Paris. So there we are, we're left with the plaster of Paris on the top, which obviously simulates the candle, although it doesn't look too much like a candle at the moment. Want a bit of cleaning up to do there, but before we do that, we're going to create some kind of candle wax drips with the plaster of Paris over the top of that candle template. Right, so we're going to mix up some more plaster of Paris. And for this layer of plaster of Paris, we're going to let it set to a consistency where we can drip the plaster of Paris over the top of this candle shape to create these dripping wax effects. So look a little bit cartoony. The skull looks a bit cartoony, so it's all added with the flavour of the overall model. So just mixing up that plaster of Paris, I'll let that set a little bit so it sort of turns into a little bit of a gloopy mixture, so we can drip that over the top. Right, so we're nearly there with a gloopy consistency. And you can start pouring that over the top of this candle part and try and create some of these drips. This is going off quite quick actually. Well, that wasn't kind of the look I was going for, but I'm going to try and maybe resurrect something out of this. It's kind of a bit OTT, but you can experiment with yourself and see what happens. I think I've had this plaster of Paris hanging around for quite a long time, so it's gone off quicker than what I anticipated. So I'm going to try and make something that resembles a candle here. And just hollow out this middle area. I don't even know if that looks like a candle at this stage. I'll try and tidy it up a little bit more. It's still a little bit soft, so I'll let that go hard and see if I can tidy it up a little bit. I don't know, it looks like a splodge rather than a candle, but anyway, you get the idea. Probably must be applied a little bit more runny than what I applied it, because I wanted the actual part there, the part that we made with the cardboard tube, I want more of that exposed to make it look more like a candle. But anyway, we'll see what we can do then. Right, so this has been let dry for quite some time, over a week. As you can see here, the plaster of Paris is cracked, and the reason that cracked is because I mixed water in after I'd mixed the original batch to try and keep it in a runny form. That's because my plaster's going off. You shouldn't have these problems. You just pour down, but just don't mix in any extra water once you get going. So that's the reason for that. So what I'm going to do is fill these cracks in with some clay. And you shouldn't need to do this, but I'll put on the video anyway. So this will be like a repair job. Right, now we just want to drill a hole in the top of the candle part, just to seat this tea light candle into the top. Just need to sink it in, not very far in. So obviously got this drill bit here, which is just slightly bigger than the actual tea light candle. So here we go. Right, so that should be okay. I'll just use a knife to smoothen out these edges. And we'll also fill this little hole in with some polyfiller. I also use some polyfiller around filling in the parts which I start filling with clay. I've left this lying around for a little bit, so it's probably noticed the difference in the video quality from the last video footage. So there we go, I'm just going to put this polyfiller in that hole. And the next step is we'll give it a prime. I'm going to use some white spray paint, primer spray paint, so that'll help the layers of paint stick to the top of the skull on top of the primer. Right, so we put the primer spray undercoat on, and I put a couple of layers of that on, and now I'm just going to put an undercoat layer all over the model. So that's going to be a mixture of black and orange, just to give a kind of brown looking effect. You can use brown, just straight brown, burnt umber. I think I'm running out of burnt umber. Okay, I won't go into too much depth about the painting in this particular video. There's other painting effects videos on the channel, so you can have a look at those, and there'll be more to come as well. So I'll get this to a relatively decent standard, and then that will be ready for making a latex mould and then casting further reproductions of this particular skull. So anyway, I'll get on with it and continue painting. Okay, so there we are, job done, and what I'll probably do is put a bit of clear lacquer over the top of that, and then that'll be ready for making a latex mould. And of course, like I said before, obviously make some concrete casts out of them and make quite a few copies. Right, so I'm going to get a candle and we'll see what it looks like. Right, here we are today, gonna paint up a skull head. Well, this is kind of a skull plaque, which actually comes from a full skull, but I moulded some up so you can like hang them on the wall. It looks like they're sort of coming out of the wall. So there's some previous videos with skulls, painting them in sort of metallic effects, but this one I want to paint up in like a natural looking boned skull. And first of all, I've primed or undercoated this concrete sculpture with acrylic paint, 2 coats, and it's white acrylic paint mixed in with a little bit of brown, so it just gives you just a slight off-white. And first of all, we're going to paint this. We're just going to fill in the sort of crevices with some brown or some burnt umber, and this is different to the dry brushing, so we're just going to paint it in and then wipe the excess paint off with a cloth. So I'm going to thin down some brown with some water and do just that. Okay, so this is thinned down, the brown paint is thinned down relatively watery, and just sort of paint in. I'll start with the eyes and just paint that in. It doesn't really matter if you make any mistakes, just wipe it off. And we'll build this up in layers to try and get some kind of authentic look. damp down the cloth slightly. I don't want it too wet, but just a bit damp. Right, so we'll continue just filling in these areas. Right, okay, so that's where we're at. That's the first layer. Just let that dry off a bit, give it 10-20 minutes, and then we'll do the same again and paint another coat of brown over the top. Okay, I'm not sure if I mentioned about the undercoat. It's probably best, well definitely best, to undercoat your item 24 hours in advance, or the night before, just to let the paint cure, because otherwise if you paint it, if you wipe off your wet paint which is going over the top of the undercoat after not letting the undercoat dry or cure properly, it tends to wipe off the undercoat as well, so which obviously you don't want. So leave it for 24 hours and I'll give you, that should be plenty, and then you can continue with adding your details. So anyway, so I'm going to add the second coat now and just build up these layers and do the same again with the brown paint. Alright, so that's where we're at the moment, so we'll let that dry off again. Might need a couple more coats, just to sort of balance out the brown, and we'll just see how it goes. I'll let that dry and do some more painting when it's dried. Right, so this is going to be the third coat. I'm just going to put some thicker paint in the eye sockets just towards the back. Just to darken that up slightly, just towards the back. Maybe just a touch inside the nose. Just continue with the more watered down paint over the skull. Okay, I reckon I'll do maybe one more coat, see how it's looking after that, but I think it's getting there. So I'll just let that dry and then we'll go for a fourth coat. We'll go for the fourth coat. Well, my paintbrush snapped towards the end, but I think that's probably telling me to stop. So what I'm going to do now is just put my finger into the cloth and just highlight some of the lighter areas, take away some of the paint on those highlights to bring that base coat through a bit more, and then it's pretty much done. Right, so there we are. I'd say that's pretty much done. I'll move the camera so you can see the skull. And I think that's turned out pretty well. I hope it's coming out okay on the camera. Right, so there he is. The battery just ran out then, so I just hung him on the wall while I just charged the camera up a little bit. So yeah, I'd say he's turned out pretty well. Quite happy with that. And I did some others with some different colours. There's another one hung on the wall here, which is a mixture of blacks, browns and blues, whereas the one I did in this video is just white and brown, or white and burnt umber. So obviously you can experiment, and there's a metallic one down here, which I've got some videos on how to create these kind of effects. Right, I've primed this skull with some brown priming paint, and I'm going to put some reactive bronze metal paint over the top, and this is the brand I'm using. And what I'll do is I'll stipple it into the nooks and crannies and get a nice effect. And this will be the first coat, and then we'll do a second coat after that, which will be the reactive coat with the patina, which I'm going to spray on the second coat. So here goes with the first coat. Right, so there's the first coat, and we'll let that dry for about half an hour, and then we'll come back and do the second coat, which I'll apply the green patina to and give a natural aged bronze look. Right, so I've got the green patina, and I've transferred that into a water bottle, but before I spray the patina on, I'm going to give the skull another coat of copper paint. So I'm going to shake the metallic paint up. I'm going to work quick here because I will spray the patina on while the paint is still wet. Right, so now here goes for the patina with a spray. Good spray. And now we'll just have to wait for the patina to take the effect into the copper metallic paint. Right, so there we have the green patina effect on the bronze, and now what I'm going to do is just dry brush a little bit of bronze paint over the top to give it that wearing look. Right, so there's the finish. I'm going to put some black paint onto the skull also. Maybe bring out some of the low points a bit more into contrast against the high points. Okay. Right, so I've got some thinned down black acrylic paint here, so I'm going to bring out the skull all over the patina, and then I'm going to wipe it off with a sponge. So hopefully it'll bring the effect out a little bit more. Alright, so I have a damp sponge here. I'm just going to wipe off the highlights. Just going to buff it just to bring out some of this bronze. And I may even put a little bit of more bronze paint. Oops. I think that'll do. So there we are. One green patinaed bronze effect skull.